are sitting in the back of the room to come on down. There is no microphone, and so you'll be able to hear much better and see the slides more easily if you do move up. My name is Renee Sandell, and I have the great pleasure of nominating Dr. Renee Sandell for the Lowenfeld Award this year. And I decided to get cute this morning. So I took Lowenfeld's last name, wrote it down, and these are just a few of the many attributes that make Renee so deserving of the Viktor Lowenfeld Award for 2019. I've known her a long time. She's been active in the field for a long time. She's outstanding in her work for feminism. She was one of the leaders with Georgia Collins in introducing feminist art education. She's interested in wellness and art through visual fitness, and you'll be learning more about that today. She's empathetic. She lives near the national capital, but she's also known for bringing people to Washington for Summer Vision Institutes, and I hope there are some of you here who've been Summer Vision people. Yay. Good. She's been known recently for her work with the FTC palette, Form, Theme, and Content palette, that's used in art education programs and in museum education. She is energetic and enthusiastic, a loving grandmother, and a distinguished art educator. So I hope you all enjoy Renee's Lowenfeld lecture today.
Thank you, Marianne, and thank you all for coming. I know you have a lot of choices. Can you hear me in the back? Because I can't talk any louder. Okay. And this is the third and the last time. We invite you to come closer just so you can hear and really see, because we're talking about visual fitness, and visual fitness is clearly, visibility is a factor in terms of visual fitness. If you can't see, you know, if your kids in the back of the room can't see, they're not going to be a part of it. Anyway, I'm thrilled to be here. It's an extraordinary recognition for me. And this lecture gives me the honor to reflect on my own professional stages in art education and on Lowenfeld's amazing impact on the field and my own in our increasingly visual world. Before I begin, I want to dedicate this lecture to my colleague, Dr. Georgia Collins, who passed away on January 1st of this year. Georgia and I wrote 2 books for NAEA. We came to many conferences. We did a lot of presentations. And she was a dear colleague and a remarkable partner I guess, in just coming up with ideas and trading ideas. And I feel like, and she did a lot of things for NAEA too, so a lot of what she did inspired me so much, and I really feel that a lot of my creativity and insight comes from working with Georgia Collins. I also, because we're in Boston, I need to, no fire drills today. I also want to remember my life partner, Stephen Sandell, who passed away almost 20 years ago, but the city of Boston was very kind to us. He had a bone marrow transplant here at Dana-Farber, and it's very interesting that he passed away in the same hospital where my 2 grandchildren were born. So, okay. So, anyway, I talk a little bit about Viktor Lowenfeld. First of all, I also want to thank Marianne for nominating me, and Enid Zimmerman, and Stephanie Baer, and Stephanie Danker, and Ami Kandawala, and others supporting my nomination. Marianne, in preparing her nomination, she asked me to share some bullet points of how my work relates to Lowenfeld's. And that was really quite a task. How did my work relate to Lowenfeld's? But I started to think about this 21st century we're in, and a lot about the contrast. And so I'm going to be talking quite a bit about that. But I am still ever inspired by his illustrated research on creative and mental growth. And if there was ever a time where we needed to address engaging creativity and insight, it's now. So one of the connections, aside from the stages, which I just grabbed onto, starting with scribbling, and then ordered scribbling, and then naming, and as far as it went. As a parent, I had an opportunity to, I was asked to write an article for parents about working with kids and their art. And here's a piece, Artful Communications, and this drawing is by my older son, Larry, who isn't here today, but this is the family. There's me, look alike. And my husband, Steve. And there on my hip, stuck to my hip, is my son, David, who is in the audience. Can you just stand up for a minute? So it's very thrilling to see all these patterns and stages. We are living in an amazingly visual world. What would Lowenfeld think? What would he think of these travel books? And a lot of these images are not new. I mean, I really probably need to update it even more, but where people want to look at and see where they are. They want to see the anatomy of a block in Paris. You can use a visual dictionary. You can use a dictionary to learn languages. You have a visual thesaurus. Our students, everyone can get images everywhere. Make our dorm rooms into museums. We can learn about the creative process. And of course, social media, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Pinterest. Everybody's a collector, everybody's a curator, and everybody can share. Here's some of my boards. Instagram, everyone's an artist. And even everyone's a critic. Have you ever seen so many photos of plates in restaurants to make your decision? So it's pretty amazing, and I'm always thinking of the contrast. So I wonder what Lowenfeld would think about where we are in terms of visual literacy, studio thinking, and learning in a visual age, where everybody needs the ability to interpret, use, appreciate, and create images and video using both conventional and 21st century media in ways that advance thinking, decision-making, communication, and learning. So I just can't help but think about then and now. So, I loved all the pictures that Lowenfeld had showing, and it showed what kids knew and what they thought and how they saw the world. So you see these children sitting around a table, smiling, literally around the table, right? And then I look at now. And this is a screenshot from the computer, my computer, where I was looking for classes at my local Apple store, and I saw they really weren't having that many for adults. In fact, they're sort of getting by devices and media. But this is Art Lab for Kids. Make your own emoji. Well, how about that? Are we teaching kids pre-schematic or what? So anyway, but the contrast is vast. So art is a visual language, and it's also even an equity issue. Because everyone needs to navigate around the plethora of graphic data, media distraction, fake news, alternative facts, whatever you want to call it. Everybody needs to read images along with texts, contexts, subtexts, and to use them for global understanding. So here's a quote: "It's not enough to believe what you see, you must understand what you see." Agree? Guess who said that? Leonardo. Couldn't be more true now. So I've been working with the notion, partly because I've taught visual literacy for probably about 40 years, and I find that it's a little too passive. It's just reading, it's not performing or acting. So I see it as I see visual fitness, and for everybody, we can't just have a few artists or geniuses. It's a proactive survival strategy that helps every 21st century learner decode and encode meaning. And that is, I guess, how I define visual fitness, an ability to decode and encode meaning, as it is simply said. And this involves three key things that I'll be talking about today. Focus. Everyone needs to focus. Think if we said that art education helps you focus, we'd have parents saying, oh yeah, my kid needs that. I need that. Access. Just being able to explore your own creativity, your own sense of design that you need to be involved in no matter what career you're in. And community. And I'll be talking about these in a little moment. But clearly, everybody needs the kind of discernment, decoding, and encoding, especially in a world that's as distracting as ours. So what I thought I'd do, though, is start with some stages of my professional development towards visual fitness. And I'll be talking about my early days, my emerging professional days, and then my, I guess, more active days. I, like a lot of, like some people my age, was influenced by technology. Growing up in the 50s, when we first got our television, it was also an opportunity to get a program, not a program that you would think of as a program, but get a game, I guess it was, a box called Winky Dink. And what it was a piece of vinyl. Oh, thank you. You know what I'm talking about.
Remember that.
Okay. So, and you literally could draw right on the, on the screen over this piece of vinyl. So that was one. The other is my most favorite art teacher of all time, John Nagy. And probably every time I see someone with that kind of beard, I kind of think of him. But anyway, that's where I had a kit. Whoop, I had a kit on the right. It showed a lot of looking at structures, breaking things down, different kinds of pencils, and so nice to see some people nodding. Okay, so and I began to have a love of materials. I also had some very interesting conversations, meaningful conversations about an oil painting that my grandfather brought back when he escaped Nazi Germany. I don't know how he got it here, but we talked a lot about this painting, and I began to look very closely. And it's a genre painting. It was done in Germany, and it has, we talked a lot about the people, we talked about the ship. And we asked a lot of questions. That sailboat really was sort of a trompe-l'oeil. You couldn't tell if it was part of the stairs, if it was hanging. And I think from some of these conversations, I learned to question what I was seeing and look for evidence. I also want, and living with ambiguity is something we need to do. So I think that was another influence. Early affirmations are really important. When I moved from Queens to Manhattan, I went to junior high school at Robert Wagner, and at the same time I took art lessons to develop a portfolio so I could apply to go to the High School of Music and Art. And so I did those after school. I also was in the neighborhood of the Met, so I often went very quickly in my lunch hour. But one of the paintings I did with my private teacher, Mrs. Schoen, was this one with ink. I Wonder, it was a self-portrait, and I brought it to my teacher at Robert Wagner and to my great surprise, one day I am sitting in assembly, and I'm called up, and I see my picture in a mat, and apparently I got some kind of award in the art and poetry. And that was a real thrill. And they actually brought us up to this is from the Herald Tribune, they actually took a photo of us on the roof. So early affirmation's very important. You never know where that will take you. So I went to the High School of Music and Art, which was wonderful. It was a rich environment with a lot of art learning and of going to museums in New York and a lot of media. I remember one class in watercolor, a lot of that base. In senior year, we were able to pick our area of interest to work kind of independently, and I picked advanced painting. And I, at 17, was like most of the class, but there were 6 kids that knew what to do. They kind of could just do it. But the rest of us kind of hung out. Our teacher was very laissez-faire. There was no structure to the learning. So it kind of influenced some of the structure that I developed. But as a result, I didn't feel I grew very much. I lost some confidence, and I ended up going to City College of New York as a math major for my freshman year. However, that only was my freshman year. The calculus didn't do it for me. But I also developed an interest in organizations. And I was very active, I really loved freshman orientation. It gave me a place, and I was a senior. When I was a sophomore, I was the president of freshman orientation. And I still remember giving a speech to the parents in the huge Gothic Great Hall, you see here. And my speech was triple spaced. I was trying to do it. I was very nervous. And when I came down from the stage, one of the parents said, there, you did fine. But I never thought I'd be doing this talk. So you never know. City College in art education was quite wonderful. Sherman Drexler, Joan Price, Irving Kaufman, and it was the 60s. It was quite fun. And one of the favorite quotes from the book in the middle is, "If you don't get lost, there's a chance you'll never be found." So here I am in my that girl Marlo Thomas look. That's my first job at Cedar Park High School. I later moved to Ireland for a semester and then went to Ohio State. And at Ohio State, I met so many inspiring professors, Ken Morantz, Eflin, Gil Clark, Jim Degg, Terry Barrett, and many of my special friends who are here too. I especially got a lot out of the Ohio guidelines that really showed me a balanced curriculum, not studio or media focused, but studio experience, creative response, and art and society. And of course, from Laura Chapman, I learned about the importance of context. So in my graduate work, and this was a time when Linda Nochlund's book came out, Why There Have Been No Great Human Artists, I began to, if you will, encode ideas that I had about feminism. Let's see what else I can say about that. And this was part of my master's show in which I had projectors set up so that with 30 minutes to look at these works in a square space and then 30 minutes to look at sequences of slides. Very interested in the process of looking at something that was final. I also studied my first women's studies class, and for my project, my final project, I studied Marie Laurencin. Most of her work looked very feminine and full of pastels and very soft. And I actually took some time to study 1906 to 1913, when she was part of the Cubist movement. And I wrote an article, I actually presented at CAA, and I wrote an article that was in the first women's art journal called Marie Laurencin, Cubist Muse or More. I was an art historian, but I did some art history, and I looked at a key period. which was very different than the kind of surveys that most of us have. So when after my master's at Ohio State, I began to study feminist art education. This is from my first article in studies. And I talked about the women's movement that was moving around children, not and art teachers as well. And I think my point here is that I was just getting really involved with both the encoding and decoding, or decoding and encoding meaning visually. And the article is in the 50 years of studies. I collaborated with Georgia Collins. We did 2 books together. The second book, The Gender Issues, we did with many people, so that we edited as an anthology. And I've worked with others and curriculum. One area that I was very interested in is connecting art history and studio. And here I just fell in love with Lou Wilson's and Al Hurwitz's book, Teaching Drawing from Art. And so, in some ways, I looked at a different kind of artistic development. Instead of focusing on, the stages that Lowenfeld had, I looked at 5 modes of seeing: visual thinking, working thinking from memory, observation, imagination, narrative, and experimental. And I began to do a problem called Journey from Bayou to Your Personal Tapestry, engaging kids in those kinds of experiences. And I did a little film that you can find on YouTube. I went to MICA. I was lucky to go to MICA and become very active in the professional development of teachers. And it's an amazing school, is and was, and I got to work with Karen Carroll and Al Hurwitz, and had great fun working with Baltimore Museum, and really focusing on the professional development of teachers. I went to George Mason in 2003 and started a master's program. They initially wanted a bachelor's program, a BA in art education. I knew there wouldn't be enough content, and I had come from a very powerful program, so we created an MAT program, and we work with a number of museums. Some people are here who I saw some of them in it, but really working with original objects. And that led to summer vision. So this takes me to, that's enough about me for now, but this takes me to visual fitness for all, engaging creativity and insight. And I really see 3 interrelated and interdisciplinary purposes that help foster clarity of vision and communication. Focus, like I said before, focus. If you don't have focus, you're out of focus. Right? So think of fitness. What about the kinds of fitness that we need? It involves strength. It involves balance. It involves flexibility. And then think about unfit. So anyway, I'm just putting these out there as one key is focus, and next is access. Everyone needs access to universal visual expression. And it doesn't mean everyone has to be a painter, but everyone has to maybe go to a paint store and choose the right paint for their office, and it needs to have that knowledge. And finally, community. Can't be done on its own. So I'm going to, I want to end on time, so I'm going to go a little quickly here, but know that I use form plus theme plus context, or FTC to make it more speakable, as a balanced way of seeing. Art has form, it has theme, it has context, and I'll be breaking that down a little bit. And a lot of this came from looking at how we focus so much on form. Same thing happens in math, People have math anxiety because it's all focused on operations. But if you have themes and context, it's why I like word problems better, math problems better than, so anyway, so this is the point of the balance. And my first article really started with balancing our curriculum. So that a lesson to be looked at as a work of art. And artists and teachers do this intuitively, ensuring balance. So I created an FTC palette. It's just been revised, so the design is a little better. It's done by a graphic designer. Just finished. I am working on a website, so that was part of it. I was happy to include these here. But it's basically a visual organizer that balances formal, thematic, and textual considerations in art and other things. And I'm going to just go very quickly through this. So first, I'll show besides the Great Wave. I point out that people know it, but then people know it, but if they, this is all I needed for my art history exam. I didn't need, anything else. But I question that. I think we do need to look at different aspects of the form. So what I think you see here are criteria, and then we look for evidence of that criteria. But if we don't have the criteria, and it applies to many things, and I like to break it down, so right away you might say, oh, overlap, looking at parts and in the distance. And I will just say one thing here, which is that it was relatively recently that I realized that these little people in the boat, these little faceless, I always thought of them like a teapot, but these little, that they're pairs, they're doubles, they're together. They're not, you couldn't move a boat like that without having it's about collaboration. So anyway, and maybe more. So we can look at the theme in its own culture, Japanese culture, even going back to the Bible. I love Mickey's hands, not Mickey's hands, the sorcerer's hands, and certainly in films. So when people realize they do have a stronger connection through many things they've seen that relate to this theme, it becomes more powerful, more meaningful. And then finally, context, when, where, by whom, for whom, and then all the kinds of intentions and purposes. And there's a lot we can learn when we look at our own tsunamis and other things that have happened. I include the miners from Chile because they came up in pairs. That's how they were rescued. And of course, always as looking at this image as a very popular cultural icon. In fact, these are a couple of shots from one of my Pinterest boards, Great Waves. And then for this talk, I had to look up emojis. Look what I found. And one is from Apple, and one is from Google, and I didn't know that was so differentiated. So this is the visual world we're living in, our students are living in. And I like to point out, one way of looking at the balance is, if we look at form, we look at modernism, we can see it emphasizes form. Look at postmodernism, it emphasizes theme. And we look at visual culture, it emphasizes context. We need all three. So form, theme, context is about decoding and encoding meaning. I'm mostly going to be talking about using it to decode, focusing on the criteria, but we can also use it for encoding. So works of art, museums as works of art, designing lessons, so forth, and ideas and ideas and issues. So here's just an example of an FTC palette, and some of you have seen this, and these will be posted on the website once it's finished. But while we might look at these separately, we begin to make connections across. So when you see one like this, you're meant to cross out, mark up, move things around, and make it your own interpretation. But it's really important to see it on one page, because then you can see a big picture. So those of you in summer vision, we look at a museum, and there are different criteria for a museum here than an artwork. So a lot of it's about putting down the the criteria and then the evidence that you can find. Finally, this is something I've been working on this year. I've been looking at, in order to live through the angst I have felt about the Me Too movement, I actually created an FTC palette for it. And I have been, of course I get to add every week. But I think it's really important that we see the big picture, not respond to one issue or one aspect, or just get a reaction and then not know what to do with it. So I did create this one, and it will be on the website, and it is seeing the big picture, and it involves looking at like just the evidence, and then the themes, and then the context. The red marks are the accused, people who've been named. I can't, people who have been accused. So you can kind of see up here, from lewd photos to sexual jokes to locker room comments about looks, and so forth. And I really, it was important to go into what it looks like, and also what it feels like down below, and then the big idea here, it's misogyny manifestations, and then finally who, when, where. So I have another one, it's a little fuzzy. So what it feels like, after effects, aftermath. I also look at cultural sources and perpetuation. Where does this come from? So I have found a lot to explore. So obviously it's gotten really, it's gotten tight. One of the things that happened with this one is I ended up creating a part at the bottom, which was remediation strategies, this became a legal size document. So, the balanced way, of decoding an issue in context would be what it looks like, what it feels like, what are the manifestations, and what are the cultural sources of perpetuation, and the who's, and then the impact. And so, one could do that, I believe, and especially in a time of alternative facts. This helps me see straight. But what if you did one for climate change? What if you did one for racism and bigotry? What does it look like? It's probably just popping into your head. What does it feel like? Can you imagine it feeling like? That involves empathy, and so forth. So anyway, I just shared that with you. So that's the focus, or having more focus, or having something to focus on. The next area I want to talk about is access, universal visual expression through marking and mapping. Some of this comes from my own artwork, work that I've done. My work usually involves having people also engaged with me. So this is from a show of mine of many years, last century. Another show. I actually, for this show, had every Thursday afternoon, I was in the gallery with materials and people came. Because if you're in a museum and you really get it, you want to go home, right? You want to go home and get back to the studio, okay? So I've called it, because this is about access, marking and mapping. And it really involves two exploratory processes: visual note-taking, which is decoding meaning, and I see many people doing it at the conference, and visual journaling, the encoding meaning. And I have a recent example of a show I was in called The One House Project, where 300 artists addressed issues of immigration and inclusion. And so I did a panel. We all did 12-inch panels, and they were all made into a house. And this is one I did for my mother, who's 91. And there she is with the generations. And there's me. But the reason I show it is because I was decoding. I was actually decoding an oral history tape from the Holocaust Museum, and I was encoding. And I think the processes work together. So one of the ways I give people access is, keeping in mind we all need warm-up and we need practice. So I've had some fun with creating this little card. Someone's giving it as a textbook, my little textbook, and inviting people to mark it up. So, and just explore media. We'll know how to use pencils and pens and brush pens even. And it's fascinating what people come up with. Just as a way to get everyone on the same page, not happily, but just kind of working. So this was a woman, it was in my workshop, who was a graphic designer, hadn't touched a pencil or art tool in 10 years. So she kind of went to town. But what's really fun is that if you put them together, you see how unique everybody's is. So, and I've been using marking and mapping with FTC. Here I have students. One is here, I think. There you are, Maria. Okay, so just to mark and map their own pre-service art history. And then I've also been working with Marianne, Jackie Kibbe, Kim Sheridan, Ami Kantawala on a project where during a class on the history of the field of art education, students spend 14 weeks with one piece of paper and it evolves. They begin to, still using, we only have 2 rules of marking and mapping. First, consider all your space. Don't fill it, but consider it. The second, turn any mistake into a surprise. So that's all the guidelines I have to give. But anyway, I'm pretty excited to see what they come up with. And here's one from one of Ami's students, CJ Riley. He's not at the conference, but I was pretty excited that I got included because he has me there at FGC and a lot of the quotes. But again, it's that decoding and encoding that is pretty powerful. And I've also shared, done this with artists and curators, and these were at an NEA conference we did one on marking mapping your retirement. And these are early professionals in DC, and at International Tai Chi Day, marking mapping gratitude. And the key thing I want you to notice is the faces, not the work. There's a joy when you express visually. Okay. All right. So the last that I want to talk about is community, sharing vision for global understanding in collaboration. And this also comes from my interest in professional, again, development, how we grow, and looking at professional dispositions, development, and identity. So a number of years ago, Jackie Kibbe and I, in very often observing development of teachers and what they need, what we saw in terms of their comportment and how they were growing, we took a look at the NAEA professional standards, and we put them into FTC. We really didn't have anything for the formal, plus we're all preparing students for interviewing and so forth. So what we came up with was we listed professional traits. We listed professional qualities: enthusiasm, sensitivity, assertiveness, patience, initiative. Those are traits, and we listed professional qualities of appearance, interpersonal skills, service-oriented, reflective, receptive to feedback. If we don't put it out there, how do people know what we're expecting, what the expectations are of the field, what it means to be a professional? This kind of led me to create 2 bookmarks, because we really wanted to get this out to the teachers. So one of them was called The Visual Arts Educator Is, and it listed the criteria of the expectations, because becoming an art teacher is not a job, it's a profession. So, and we found that this was not only interesting for the students, pre-service students, but also for principals, parents, and so forth. The other bookmark. These are both on NAEA's website. Their arts advocacy bookmark was based on Daniel Pink's 6 new senses. Everyone needs a sense of design, story, symphony, empathy, that should be on the top, play and meaning. And so I did one of these. So, you know, you can get these on the NEA website. But again, to be able to talk about professional expectations, these are really for impact. I have challenged my students to address all of these in every lesson. It can be done. It can be done. So sometimes, you know, if we stop just teaching for media and learning how to do it, we can have a lot more meaning. Okay, so finally, I just want to talk a bit about the sharing, and this leads me to summer vision, which involves collaborating not only with Carol Henry, who is my co-leader, but also with a lot of museums who host host participants to learn in their museums in wonderful ways. I think collaborating brings it all together, and we are an evolving community. This coming summer will be our 10th year and our 15th cohort. And our purpose is the only real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes. And I think we need to focus those eyes and recognize that. And I just have to show you all the people. You might be in there. And there's Carol. And my tagline is nurturing the nurturer. And it's astounding how much these incredible teachers need to be nurtured. They deserve to be nurtured. And it just reinstills their own nurturing. We launch it at the National Gallery. We have a textbook. I'm going to just go through this quickly. Students are involved in, mostly in the museums. We're not touring, but we are having object-specific strategies that are developed by the museum educators. And then we do visual journaling, and we have portable studios. So after 4 days, people really feel like artists, and they have done a lot of decoding and encoding. The last hour of the program is an hour of visual meditation. We take the journals away. We give a piece of folded paper for a New Eyes map, and that allows people to reflect on the 4 days, their takeaways, and what they are feeling and experiencing before we disperse. I've seen a lot of learner leaders come out of this, and I also I was part of the first SAL program, and which focuses on leaders, and so we used FTC to decode leadership we used FTC to decode leadership, and at the end, the final hour of that program in 2015, there was an hour of visual meditation where different elements of the experience were encoded very powerfully based on experience. So the key thing is that you end up having visual evidence of impact, and that's what art is. Other collaborations that I'm involved in is writing with Carol Henry and with Enid, especially about that program. I've been doing collaborative marking and mapping with Enid Zimmerman, starting with real collage, then moving to learning how to do Procreate, the Apple Store. If they're not giving those kids at Art Lab, I could get more help. And I'm very excited in terms of professional development about this new book that I'm working on with Jeff Froome called Real Lives 21, showcasing the stories of art educators. and contemporary learning through narrative inquiry. And it's a remake of Tom Anderson's book that was published in 2000, which means that it doesn't have the digital component. So even though our students love this book, as it was, we felt we needed to. So NAEA is going to be publishing this book. Hopefully it'll be available next conference. And is thrilled to, again, collaborate. So many more ideas happen. And, and I think the more that in our classrooms our students are collaborating in their learning, the more powerful they are growing. So, I've talked about developmental process, creativity, and insight. I think it's everyone's birthright. I think it's I think becoming a grandmother really got me to a place where I really started to all of a sudden look again and see, and this is my sweet Simone, who's back there somewhere. Where is she? There she is. Okay, Simone at work. Now look at Simone at work. Yes, she's making art, she's working materials, but what I want you to see is the depth of engagement. Her parents limit her time her time is always limited on any screens, and they try not to look at their screens in her presence. But she has no cell phone. She is fully engaged, and loves it. And again, so she's 3 1/4, and a couple weeks ago she did this picture of her nanny. I don't know what stage, but I'm so thrilled that, she obviously is seeing a lot. She got the eyelashes, she got the mole, she actually moved it. But anyway, so it's very powerful to, witness the beginning and want to make sure that they can focus, that these young kids have access. They certainly need it. They need to be able to decode what's happening in this world and to encode. And for us as art educators, I want to share this quote because the value is in impact. Art educators are multipliers. You don't know how many people you affect. But I love this extended quote from Marcel Proust. The only real voyage consists not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes. In seeing the universe through the eyes of another, 100 others, in seeing the 100 universes that each of them see. So I'm thankful that you came today to learn about how I'm looking at changing visual literacy to be much more active, not passive. And I think the more ways in which we can think of what it means to be fit and to encourage that fitness, I think we have so much to, I think there's a whole new role for art education because everything is interdisciplinary. So I invite you to move towards fit and visual fitness, and it's so easy and fun. Thank you.